we are shifting gears to focus on something close to all of our hearts: children's literature in India.
Yes, we are thrilled to have Shailaja Menon and Sandhya Rao, co-editors of children's books in India Story, in conversation with literary agent Kanishka Gupta.
Shailaja Menon and Sandhya Rao are co-editors of children's book An Indian Story, a comprehensive exploration of India's diverse children's literature landscape. Shailaja, an academic, focuses on literary and language education, while Sandhya, a writer-editor, has a rich background in children's publishing.
Together, they capture voices from across India, documenting key trends and challenges in the field. In conversation with literary agent Kanishka Gupta, a champion of Indian authors, they discuss the evolving world of children's books and the impact on parents, educators, and young readers.
They have gathered some fascinating insights from across India's children's literature landscape. If you are a parent, teacher, or a book nerd just like us, this one is definitely for you.
This session will be for 50 minutes. Let's give a big hand to Shailaja, Sandhya, and Kanishka.
So first of all, my congratulations to Shailaja and Sandhya for publishing a one-of-a-kind book. This is the first time someone has attempted and published a full-length study on children's publishing. My first question to both of you: why this book and why now? And the anthology looks at children's publishing post-independence. So why have you excluded, the children's publishing and, the children's books pre-independence?
I just wanted to clarify. Thank you, Kanishka, for that question. This is actually not even post-independence, not even that. It is post-1990s. So it's a very specific time period. For the last 30, 35 years, we have looked at the developments. No, he said, why post-independence? And I was clarifying that it's an even more specific time period. It's only the last 30 or 35 years post-liberalization. So I just wanted to clarify that. And if you ask why this time period, it was a breadth versus depth kind of a choice that we had to make. And if you trace, if we were to trace the history of children's literature in India, it would go back a very long way across centuries to our oral and performative traditions. Then during the colonial period, I'm just saying at least certain discernible periods. You can talk about the oral performative when it was not yet in the written form. Then the early colonial period when the missionaries came in and Bibles were being translated for children and all kinds of books were being produced for children. You can look at the late colonial period. You can look at in the early colonial period as at the establishment of school book societies or textbook societies and all of that by the British. You can look at the late colonial period when Indians started, for example, in Bengali, magazines like Sandesh and all of that. You can look at that period. You can look after independence at NBT, CBT, all of those kind of initiatives. And finally, you can look at this post-liberalization period when certain exciting new developments happened. So we thought rather than doing this broad brush stroke across the centuries, so to speak, we will just look very specifically at this time period. And I'll let Sandhya tell you why we selected this time period.
Yeah, the first thing, of course, is there has been a kind of a flowering of children's publishing in India since the 90s for various reasons, and you will discover those when you read the book. So that's the main reason. So, and it was something that we could tackle with the people working in the fields, people doing research in these areas. And since this is actually the first book of its kind in this, that is so broad, that looks at things in a very broad manner, it's a start. So we thought we should start with whatever is most familiar to us, whatever is close to us, and whatever for which we are able to get enough research material.
So now from the time period being covered in this seminal book, I would like to talk to you about the structure of the book and the methodology that you had used to uh, invite contributions in the essays.
Structure, I'll describe the structure and you can describe how you selected the thing. So there are two parts to Kanishka's question, so it's easy for us to sort of answer one part each. So the structure, there are four sort of broad areas that we have looked at. The first is sort of a background and a context setting kind of a section. We have 4 sections. One is a context setting section, including one that looks at the oral and performative history of children's literature in India, because ours is, even though it is focusing on the contemporary period, we don't think of it as an ahistorical study of children's literature. We are aware that it sort of stands on many developments that came earlier. And so we acknowledge some of those in these early chapters, as well as there is another wonderful chapter by Radhika who's sitting here, that gives an overview of developments in children's literature especially after independence. So that is the first section. In the second section, we look at specific genres. We look at specific aspects, you know. So there's one chapter that looks at illustrations, one chapter that looks at literature for young adults, one chapter that looks at non-fiction, and so on, and one chapter that looks at fiction, poetry, drama, etc. So that is the second section. The third section looks at issues that we felt were pertinent. For example, in a multilingual country like ours, translation is an issue. Representation is an issue, because we are not one India, but many, many Indias. So representation is an issue. So those kinds of critical issues. And in the final section, we look at using literature with children in classrooms, through libraries, and so on. So these are the 4 broad areas we have looked at. And interspersed, we have what we call voices. So we have voices of an author, a publisher, a reader, and so on. So we just intersperse personal, while the serious studies are longer, these are serious but personally written kind of voices, which we felt sort of gave some relief to the reader from the longer essays. How we selected, maybe you can.
Well, actually, we initially, right at the beginning, when we first had the idea to put together a book like this, we held several rounds of meetings with various people involved in children's literature. Practitioners, professionals, academics, librarians, you know, the range. And we had held about 3 or 4 rounds like these until we sort of, finally decided, okay, maybe X and Y will take care of putting together this book, in this case, X and Y being Shailaja and myself. And we had a whole team of others backing us from Parag. And we started to, and meanwhile, we had also started to list down from the suggestions that various people had made, the kind of topics, the kind of subjects that we would try to include in the book. So we made that list, and then we started to identify individuals who might best be able to write about this. Now, there is not really very much academic material available on children's literature in India. There's a lot available in the West, but not in India. There are articles that are here and there in magazines, perhaps on blogs of individual publishers. But there's nothing that's been, that anybody looks at across the board, across publishing. Now, the second question that we needed to look at was, in which language would we look at children's literature? We'll come to that a little later. But this is how we identified individuals, and we started writing to them, asking them if they would write articles for us. Meanwhile, the idea of voices had also come up, where we wanted to hear practitioners speak about how they approached their area. So if it was a writer, he or she would talk about what the writing process for children involved. If it was, we even have a reader talking about it. We have a librarian, we have an illustrator. So there is all of this. So the professional and the professionals and practitioners contribute their voices to this. Of course, it's not complete. It can never be complete because there are so many aspects to it, and we'll come to that also in a while.
Yeah, so my next question is about that only, if you don't mind. So in many of your interviews, including a talk that I saw online, you mentioned how difficult it was for you to get access to children's publishers in Indian languages. My question to both of you is that why is that so? Because I think a lot of the pioneering work in children's publishing is being done by Indian language publishers. And my second question is, every year, the Bal Sahitya Puraskar is given to, so many children's books in different languages. And I mean, the books and the authors and the publishers are mentioned. That's my question to you. Why was it difficult for you to get access to them? Oh.
It was not a question of access, really. We were able to identify a few people who could have written, say, in Hindi or Bengali or even Malayalam. The thing is, it was very difficult to pin people down to write for us, perhaps because of other commitments they may have had, or perhaps because there is a certain lack of somehow in India, by and large, I don't know if I'm generalizing, but we tend not to document, We tend to be wary of documenting, and perhaps this is one reason. Or perhaps they're also busy bringing out, publishing books that they really don't have the time, because this is not something that you can do in a day or two.
So in my personal experience, I've seen a trust deficit between writers writing in Indian languages, publishers in Indian languages, and any stakeholder representing English language publishing, and that trust deficit is quite...
I wanted to exactly speak to that. We should also be aware of the cultural location of Sandhya and myself. We are not people deeply anchored in writing in Indian languages. I have often felt that the reason we were able to get people who write in English to write for us is because we move in these circles, and there are relationships of decades, and there's a trust. Whereas with the regional language writing, we would need to do more work. I completely agree with you. It is a lack of personal relationships, and just us contacting people professionally is not going to give us the results. So it requires a different approach to bridging, and one of the approaches that I would like to see forums like this actually bridging this divide, so that we can actually meet, have tea together, have lunch together, build relationships together, so that when we reach out professionally, there is more of a communication and a sense of contact between these two worlds.
I just want to clarify that it was not for lack of trying. And when you talk about trust deficit, the thing is, we have reached out, but we have not received or perhaps we've not received anything in time, or perhaps actually the job in itself, the brief, the task is a major challenge. To actually sit down and do it requires a certain kind of, setting your mind to it. So I wouldn't be, I do think it's a big lacuna in the book, the fact that we are not able to represent work that's happening in Indian languages. But we do hope that in the future we will be able to produce a book that speaks of this in particular.
Until 2 months before the book went to press, we were waiting for a chapter on Hindi.
I faced the same issue. So my next question is about two editors from diverse backgrounds, coming together and doing this anthology. Firstly, I would like you to tell the audience about the work you do individually, and how you managed to bring these different experiences to putting together this book. Were there any fights? Was there any conflict?
Actually, no. She likes to say post hoc that there was. There was not. Okay, conflict, I mean. No, none. Seriously, none. Because we are very, very different kinds of people, but somehow very companionable, and we worked well together. I'm speaking to that part of it. She's a children's book author as well as an editor. I'm an academic by training. I work in the area of early language and literacy and children's literature. I teach courses on that. So we come from different backgrounds, and we joke with each other all the time. She says, oh, we are polar opposites, but I actually think we are extremely similar in many ways. So I want to emphasize our similarities today, Sandhya, which is that we are both meticulous people, we are disciplined people, we are timely people, and we are serious about our work, and we are very affectionate people, I would say.
I'd say that we sort of reached out to each other and met halfway. So I think an important, she lives in Bangalore, I live in Chennai. So all of it was done online, on the phone, on Zoom and all of that. One thing I would like to say is that while we often had different views on certain things, we always were willing to listen to each other. And then when we listened to each other, we were willing, each of us was willing to give in to the other if we felt strongly enough. And I think that was one reason why we were able to work very, very comfortably with each other. And again, the other important thing is that we were both engaged in doing something we believe in, something we love. Children's books and getting children's books to children and engaging with people engaging with children and children's books. So that I think brought us together.
So now I would like to talk to you about what are the things that you have observed in the children's publishing landscape that have evolved or changed over the last 3 decades, be it the new genres that authors are attempting, the quality of writing, subject matter. What are the changes that you have seen?
You want to go first?
And are there any interesting insights or research that you collected, during the course of, putting together this book that could not make its way into the book?
I'll just be brief, Shailaja. Well, one thing is that production qualities are quite amazing now in India from the way they were, in the sense that it's not just 2 or 3 publishers who produce good quality books. Almost everybody is able to, because we have access to that kind of technology related to production. I think, and I'm speaking now of publishing in the English language, I think at least some publishers are willing to stick their necks out and take chances with the books that they publish, tackle themes that would not even have been looked at. There are a lot more young people, especially, I think, young writers, young illustrators who are now looking at children's writing for children, illustrating for children as perhaps a professional option. And I also think they are reacting to what is happening around them. And I'm speaking, when I say this, I speak of what's best, what we see best in the market. I think all of these things contribute to the kind of changes that are happening. And I think publishers mainly play a very, very important role in enabling this. The one area that remains a problem is distribution and the visibility of children's books, which, you walk into any bookstore anywhere in the country, and most of the time you'll find children's books just pushed into some 3 or 4 shelves, and that's it. So that still remains a problem. Despite that, many publishers are finding their own ways of making their books available and seen.
In terms of changes, I would say the imagination of the child reader has changed significantly. I'm not talking about the changes in the books independent of the imagination of the reader. So a reader who has the leisure to read, a child reader who has a choice, who enjoys fairly democratic relationships with adults, a child reader who doesn't need to be patronized, a child reader who's able to deal with complexity So in very many ways, the world that we're imagining for children and the children's place in that world is reflected in rather a different way post-liberalization. This is not a surprise because we have created a different kind of economic system. We have a different kind of society emerging from it. And therefore, different kinds of familial structures and various other structures, and these are reflected in these new books. This is over and above what Sandhya has already talked about: production quality, design, explosion of genres, and various kinds of people coming in. So I feel that the location of the child reader, the imagination of the child reader has significantly changed. So if you say that we didn't have young adults, so many books for young adults earlier and we do now, that's because we didn't have an imagination of the young adult then that we have now. So that imagination has changed, so that is correlated with the creation
And
of
there's just
books.
one other thing I'd like to add, the fact that somewhere along the way, maybe a couple of decades ago, NGOs started to get into the sector, and they began to reach these books out to children who could not otherwise be reached. So, so then some publishers took it upon themselves to reach their books that had been translated into local languages, reach those children through these NGOs. And so there are several such initiatives all over the country. I think that also has been a big change. You had NBT in the past, is publishing in 13 languages and reaching books out everywhere. But now independent publishers are also able to do that thanks to support.
So there are certain genres like poetry, drama, creative non-fiction that have not really taken off, and some of the essays touch on this topic. Then there is the genre of young adult, which is so big globally, but does not sell in India at all. What are your thoughts on that?
We have seen quite a lot of movement in the young adult genre, according to me. I don't know the sales figures. I don't have that. But we are seeing a lot in terms of authors writing for this age group.
As well as creative non-fiction, there's a lot
and
of
creative
that
non-fiction.
happening as well.
Are you referring to the sales figures?
But poetry, yes. In fact,
Poetry, yeah.
I know that some publishers in their submissions list, they say, don't send us poetry. Poetry is tough. Drama is tough.
Yeah.
But creative non-fiction,
And,
I think there's a
yeah.
boom there.
And young adult.
And young
No,
adults,
so let me turn this question back to you.
Yeah.
Poetry and drama for adults, do they sell as well as fiction?
No, not at all. In fact, even short stories don't sell.
Correct.
And a publisher is going to consider a short story collection only if it's extraordinary or if the stories are connected in some ways. If, they are like, and then they want to call it a novel even though, it's a novel in stories. I think poetry, drama, both are very hard to sell. I also feel that while children's publishers in India want to do a lot of creative fiction, creative non-fiction, they want to do YA, they want to do fantasy, they want to do picture books by new writers. They are constrained because the sales numbers are like plummeting, and we have like the same set of writers who are publishing year on year and doing well. So I think it's a very difficult market. And ever since COVID, after the increase in paper cost, especially the rise in the steep rise in the cost of special paper, it's getting difficult for publishers to publish picture books. I don't know whether that came up during your research. And
I wouldn't say so. I mean,
Actually, to be honest, we haven't looked at the sales figures very carefully in terms of, like when we look at young adult fiction, we have looked at it more from the production end of it. And we have looked at the kinds of young adult fiction being put out, kinds of creative fiction, but maybe he's talking about it from the fact that it's not moving as well as other segments. That I
think
wouldn't
picture
be able
books
to.
are doing well. And
Picture
I think,
books are doing well,
I
yeah.
think if you're linking it to the pricing, and if you're linking it to the fact that a lot of people think children's picture books, for example, shouldn't be priced at more than 40 rupees and 50 rupees, yes, there is a problem matching production and price. But I do think, just take a look at the books there, and you will see that there is this massive range, and there's room for more, of course. And there is a kind of, The quality may vary from book to book, publisher to publisher, writer to writer, illustrator to illustrator. That's a different matter. But I do think picture books are doing well. I do think non-fiction is doing well. Yeah,
And young adult.
and young adults.
So now I have a tricky question for both of you. So I was, going through the table of contents. I've also read the book. Why are there no contributions from mainstream publishers and editors? I mean, there is an essay by Shayoni Basu of Duckbill, and now Duckbill is, I think, part of Penguin, but it's still an independent publishing house. But I did not see any contributions by, mainstream publishers of children's books like Puffin, Harper, Hachette. I'm just curious.
Yeah, this is not, I mean, one, yes, we could only have X number of chapters. As it is, I personally think this book is too fat. It weighs 850 grams. So it's a lot, it's a lot to carry.
We call it a paneer maker.
But the second thing is, these are not chapters written by individuals representing publishing houses, okay? That again, but yes, and there's a lot that still needs to be said. And one of the things, in fact, Shailaja and I have been talking about it, is that we need to have a chapter on mainstream publishing. And we need to have a chapter on audiobooks. We need to have a chapter on distribution. So there's a whole long list of chapters that you will not find here. But then there was only so much we could put in. Two, there were only so many people we could persuade to write and turn in their chapters on time. And three, we hope that Parag will, and four, most importantly, we do not have chapters representing the different Indian languages in which children's books are being published. So five, we hope that Parag will support a project that takes care of all these things in volume 2 and then volume 3.
Can I add to that? There is a bias in our assumption. Why we contacted certain people, and why we post hoc contacted certain people. There were certain assumptions, and I am going to be honest with that. With this, may I be honest?
I'm just curious because
I was seeking permission to be honest.
I have a neutral stance. I just felt that
most of the sales figures in India, even today, are dominated by mainstream publishing. Okay, but we felt that most of the innovations were being made by another group of publishers. Let me state this bias out up front. So the mainstream publishers were doing what mainstream publishers have been doing for a while. One is they have been bringing backlists of Western books to India. Two is they've been trying in their own ways to develop some form of, non-backlist kind of a list for Indian children. But we still felt it had a highly Western consciousness aesthetic and a kind of an audience that it was targeting. So we started with where we felt the real innovations lay, and we were trying to find people who had tried to develop an indie voice, indie aesthetic, indie kind of a consciousness. So where did we find this? We found this in these publishers who are either independent publishers or NGO-led publishing or some such. So we contacted these people where we felt that important innovations were happening with an authentic aesthetic. After we contacted them, we realized, oh my God, we have created a little bubble for ourselves. Let us now try to burst this bubble and go out and contact mainstream publishers. At that point, it was not a very fruitful exercise. We already had quite a collection. So we said, this really belongs to a different volume. And we acknowledge this gap, but this is the actual thing. We are actually excited about the work that we have represented here.
So my next question is that what do you want the casual, common reader to gain out of this? You know, if someone who's just interested in, knowing more about children's books so that they can make the right choice for the children, or if someone is just interested in the history of children's publishing, how should they navigate this book? Or is it for the industry? Is it for the practitioners?
It's for everybody who is interested, anybody who is interested in children's literature. Like we said, it's not heavily academic. but it is not ahistorical either. It is for practitioners, yes. It is for those interested in children's literature. It could be of interest to people in the industry. It could be of interest to, it would definitely be of interest to teachers and librarians. And it could be, I think, of interest to young people. No, not necessarily those studying children's literature, but even young readers who want to know about children's literature in India.
It could also be interesting to parents who are wondering what their children should read, because I have neighbors who come up to me and say, my daughter is 12 years old, what should she read? She's reading this, she's reading, or he's reading that. So for parents to know that there is a world of publishing now out there beyond what the parents grew up reading, not beyond Enid Blyton's and Hardy Boys and Amar Chitra Katha and so on, that there's a wide range, what is available, what might be appropriate for different age groups, etc. So if parents are interested, I would also recommend that you look at the children's books cited at the end of each chapter. There's a list of children's books cited. So parents could start familiarizing themselves with books that they may not have encountered, kind of books that they may not have encountered in their own childhoods. And they could start looking through that and familiarizing themselves with it as well.
But it's also, I think, a shout out to the world that children's literature in India is serious. It's serious business. And there is some very, very important work happening here, work that impacts every one of us, because, you know, we all have something or the other to do with children, and that children's literature needs to be taken seriously.
So, you know, the two of you have made a very important point in the book that children's publishing, you know, and publishers in India, they presume like a middle-class urban child as its reader. How true is that, and are efforts being made to change this and provide a more, you know, multicultural experience to the readers?
May I go first? This is a topic really close to my heart. It is not about who is presumed as the reader, but I would like to look at the community that produces children's books in India, including people like me. So I'm not pointing fingers at anybody outside this thing. I'm just saying we are a very upper middle class, English-speaking, urban kind of a community. Largely, I would say 90% of the people working in English language writing belongs to this social class and location. So when such people are producing books for a highly diverse country, it means that we make assumptions and presumptions that may not be applicable for readers across the country. We may think that what we are writing is applicable to a wide range of audiences. It may not be true. And the only way to bring that kind of a change about is to be more inclusive consciously. Now that we have got past the first hurdle of establishing this community, now we can challenge our community to become more self-consciously inclusive, bring in voices that are other than ours, and bring in aesthetics that are different from ours, and aesthetics that challenge and make us uncomfortable. And then perhaps we would get writing that is applicable to different kinds of children in our country. So I do feel very much that even when we represent diversity in our books, sometimes I get a sense that it's diversity tourism. So it is an upper middle class adult trying to explain to an upper middle class child that, look, there are other existences other than yours, and let me compassionately, empathetically display that. Not all books. I'm saying I have come across a fair number of such books, and some of them that challenge this really come from other worlds, and we need to bring in more such voices.
Shailaja, I just also want to say that we do have references to what you're talking about in some of the chapters themselves. For instance, in the chapter on diversity and representation of children, in the chapter in which we carry an interview with Mridula Koshri, for instance, about free network libraries. So it's not that it has been ignored, and it is not that, it's a deliberate choice. No. But it's just a whole set of circumstances, but everywhere. And even to refer back to your question about why there's no representation of mainstream publishers, every chapter references so many different individual books by a range of publishers. So I'm not saying that is the answer, but it's not like it's been ignored. Every contributor to this book has been very conscious of this and of this situation.
I would like both of you to talk about, you know, literacy and the role that stories plays in literacy. In one of your online interviews, you said that, you know, we live with the binary of literacy and entertainment. So how do we find a format of storytelling or a storyteller that manages to, you know, balance both?
That's a very, very difficult, I don't know, tightrope to walk. I mean, I've always felt that as a writer, for instance, I mean, this whole literacy, literature thing. But one way of looking at it, I think, is, and it doesn't matter who writes in which language. I think if I don't know how to describe this, but if the text shows a certain kind of integrity, and if the visuals and the text come together with that same sense of integrity, you will be able to tackle both of them at the same time. Having said that, sometimes you have to separate the two for various reasons.
I think India has a long culture of valuing the place of stories in children's lives. We have oral storytelling. Which one of us doesn't remember oral storytelling from our childhood? All of us do that, and one through lullabies, through stories, etc. So we have a rich tradition. It's not that Indians don't see the importance of literature for children. But somehow Indians have kept oral storytelling in its own place, in homes and kitchens and etc. It's not bedtime story, it is eating time stories and so on and so forth, bath time stories and so on. And then when we talk about literacy, we have a completely different understanding. We have not connected these two very meaningfully in the popular imagination. So when we think of literacy, we are thinking of Akshar Gyan, learning letters, phonics, etc. So somewhere, if you sort of look at the larger aims of literacy and see it as beyond acquiring the script to being critical, flexible, thinkers who have an appreciation of the world around them, your own place in the world, as well as aesthetic appreciation. So if you look at the broader aims of literacy instruction, and if we can make the case that you cannot have critical thinkers, reflective thinkers, citizens in a democracy, people with a sense of aesthetics, etc., without bringing literature into the early language or early literacy classrooms, if we can make that kind of an argument, and there's that kind of a shift in the popular consciousness, I think we will not struggle, because we are not cultures that are strangers to the value of literature in general. We just have not connected these two very clearly.
Is there going to be a sequel to the book? Are you motivated enough, or are your funders motivated enough to allow you to put together a sequel to this book?
Well, I think I've dropped enough hints over the past several months. So
our funders are sitting in the audience, so we are asking.
I think we have time for 4 or 5 questions, so anyone who's interested.
That was wonderful. I found the book quite delightful. Kanishka, when you're saying that mainstream publishers not referred to, who do you mean? I'm wondering, do you mean the HarperCollins, all of that, or do you mean the Wonder Houses, and who did you mean?
Actually, both, because this book is a history of children's publishing, and we don't have contributions from mainstream publishers. So I mean both MNCs, and I would say Wonder House is not an MNC. It's a very large independent publishing house who are doing mass market books for children that sell in large numbers. So because of the nature of the book, I felt, this is something that I noticed, and now Sandhya has told me that there are references to the book, but when you're doing a history of any person or any field, I think it's important to acknowledge the role that the big publishers and mass market publishers have played.
It is a skewed presentation, but as I said, we started from some assumptions.
Yeah, I would say, but See, I know Puffin and Harper and Hachette, they are doing a lot of mass market books, but they are also doing some wonderful literary books, in the children's space. I mean, I'm sure that you would know because Neve has given the prize to so many books published by Harper, Penguin. I just felt that there was no representation of these publishers, and that's also not.
That's a very fair point, actually.
Hi
That's
everyone.
my own personal opinion.
Hi, I'm yet to read the book, but just out of curiosity, I'm throwing my thoughts. If, if we recollect, the printing industry started around 300 years back, and until 1947, India was under British. Okay, it was a pre-independence era. The printing materials, Indians didn't have that freedom a lot in terms of expression, or the need was totally different. The necessity was totally different before the independence era. And 1950 to 1960, 70, Green Revolution, the food was the major factor for the government and even the different bodies, the infrastructure for food management, harvesting, everything was the major focus of the country. And 1980s, maybe our parents' generations, majority of the parents would have started going for education with a lot of elementary schools, government schools have been coming in. So it's a natural way that only our generation, the generation which is born from 1980s, had an opportunity to read books a lot. I mean, textbook a lot, maybe storybooks a little to start with. But this generation is something, okay, now the parents, kind of third generation from the independence, so that, okay, they are good enough to buy books, they know the importance of the books. So same way, like today's parents, if we look at, they put the same effort in terms of giving sports exposure, arts exposure, drama exposure, even an international exposure. So is this something have been covered, part of the book? Is there a thought happened on those lines?
Can you summarize your question in like a few lines?
So it is a natural
It is
inclination. If you take
yeah.
a country like UK, US, where children literacy might be well ahead because US got independence 300 years back. UK
Got
has been independent from the very beginning. Okay, so, but India got it in 1950s. Until 1970s, food was the necessity. 1990s, basic finance, basic access to the education. So this is a natural inclination to go for books, go for arts, go for sports, go for drama. And this is a natural inclination happening. Is that being covered in the book? That's what I see.
It is not being explicitly covered, although your point is a very good one. We do talk a very little bit about the fact that in colonial periods when literature was being produced for schools, who was it being produced for? Who would the presumed reader have been? It would have been a very, very tiny, minuscule section of the school going. Gender would probably have been a male gender, kind of a, would have been upper caste. So yeah, definitely this, what you're saying is an absolutely valid thing. We have, with mass education, with education for all, definitely the readership, the numbers and the kinds of readers, you're right, it's a very natural progression.
No, you do get a sense of progression. For instance, and a pivotal point is the establishment of the National Book Trust in 1957 and the Children's Book Trust. So every other chapter actually refers to this, you know. And then since then, so we're talking about, it's not specifically spelled out, but you do get a sense of what has happened since then, but we focus on the last 30, 35 years.
I had a question. Shailaja, you spoke of creating a community where there's inclusion of voices from the publishers and the authors and forming a more inclusive community. I was wondering if there is a way in which we can include voices of children in literature, and if that is important, and if that can happen, what are some ways in which we can possibly how would books look different from what they are coming out today, or what are some ways to include voices and experiences of children?
You mean in a book like this? Is that what you're saying? Or in general?
In general, I mean, the many perspectives that you bring out about children's literature in India. So I mean, what do you think about, is it important to even have a focus on including voices of children when we speak of children's literature in India is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, a couple of chapters do refer to the voices of children. And finally, all of this, I think, echoes what is because we have children and we have books for children. They may not be books. Are you talking about books written by children? Is that what you're saying? Because that would be a completely different thing.
Or children responding to literature. What, are you talking about literature produced by children or children
No,
responding to
right.
literature?
The publishing is still being done by an adult who has an imagination of the child's life. So when we speak of that imagination of where the child is coming from, what are ways in which we broaden our horizon and perspective of including the kind of
Yeah. So that, I think Sujata's chapter, if you look at the responses of children to the books we are producing, you will get a sort of a window into that kind of a thing. So for example, one child in a library that she was working in rejected a certain book saying, this book is about rich people. And so she said, where did you get that sense from that this book is about rich people? And the child pointed out the kind of tiles in the illustration and said, this is a tiled flooring, this is a rich person's house. And so then the children went back did an inquiry project into signs of richness and poverty in children's books. So those kinds of, so that kind of feedback and people listening, people who make books, interacting with children, understanding how they are viewing this. I mean, some of the books that look really beautiful and aesthetic from our perspective sometimes fall very flat with children because it somehow doesn't grip them. We might be in love with them and they're like, okay, you get excited about it, but somehow it's not exciting me. So it's very important for us to take feedback and be in dialogue. So in that sense, it's extremely important that instead of force feeding our children what we believe is good for them, we sort of keep the literary experience whole for them as well and take feedback from them. But if you are saying, should we include their voices in terms of children writing and all of that, that, is a whole nother conversation, whole nother ballgame.
So I have a question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the session. It's really interesting, especially as someone trying to break into the children's literature industry as writers and illustrators. So one of the things that we found while we were trying to pitch stories was the kind of audience, the kind of publishers and the audience that they cater to. So since we have an element of food in it, just taking an example, we keep trying to kind of tweak it based on the publishers we're sending it to because of the kind of audience that they cater to. So the food will probably not be as local if you're sending it to one person and be extremely local if you're sending it to another one. So what I'm trying to get at is, while you were doing research on the book, did you find, were there any places in the way that the Indian stories were written for children that had an impact on probably larger trends, not just in India, but outside as well? And do they sell?
But why are you tweaking these foods for different publishers? Because all of them distribute, make books available in the subcontinent. Can you give some instances of the publishers you pitched different pitches to?
So, like the kind of food, the food is not the main part, it's to explain other things.
Okay.
So some of the recipes are probably more baking related, while others are more specific South Indian dishes.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, and this is actually not a question related to this book, but a question in general about publishing. What you're saying is, suppose there's a publisher based in Chennai, and you talk about, you give a recipe that belongs to, say, Mizoram, okay? So you're saying that, that they may not respond to this, so you have to change that, right? I think that you have to discuss with the publisher. Each publisher will have their own way of, but it doesn't really come into the scope of this book.
I
So
think
I would suggest you speak to the publisher, look at what their submissions, requirements say, and accordingly write what you're
no,
writing.
but my opinion is different because if I feel that if your knowledge, information is authentic, then even a
Ideally.
Chennai-based publisher who's publishing for Pan India will be open to.
Yeah,
the
but
story.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to speak for all publishers. I'm just saying
Yeah,
that
yeah.
different people have different ways
Would
of
you
looking
like
at it.
to share your food story?
Yeah, I have a food story. There's a book that I published with Tulika many, many years ago called Mazu Mazu. It's a Kashmiri folk tale. And the recipe is very much part of that story. Now, I took it was a story set in Kashmir about Kashmiri people, so the recipe was from Kashmir. And this particular recipe was around lamb, okay, called Marzwangan Kurma. But, and it had that nice little song woven around it and all that, and very much part of that story. However, the publishers we were collaborating on it said that they didn't want a non-vegetarian dish, they wanted a vegetarian dish. So eventually, in the interests of that collaboration, it was changed to Bangan, to brinjal, you know. I don't even know if brinjal and lamb feel the same, but that's what had to be done.
Thank you. Hi. I'm so happy that this thing came up because I am from Kashmir and I had written to Tulika about this Mazu Mazu book. That the book was lovely but factually incorrect because Matswangan Korma essentially is never made without lamb. Like it is the soul of the dish. And yeah, and that being the hero of the book, when I got that book and I wanted to read it to my child, because we are Kashmiris, I was flabbergasted to see brinjal. And you will not believe what happened. You know, my husband said, you don't know about the entire history. Maybe in olden days, they used. So I Googled it. And to my surprise, a mom blogger had taken that recipe on her page and cooked it. So it was, you know, it was a dish now. And
Yeah, there's a follow-up to that because I had a phone call from a mother who said, listen, my son wants me to make Marzwangan Kurma, but he was about 5 years old, but he has a question for you. I said, okay. He came on the line and he said, do you have to wash the brinjals?
so, this was a big discussion in our house when we were discussing this book, and I did not get any response. I wrote a very polite email that, it's a lovely book, but factually a bit incorrect.
Actually, I don't remember seeing any such email, actually,
And
to be honest.
there's more that I want to talk about it maybe after
Yeah,
the
after
session.
this, yeah. We have more questions.
Hi. So, I just think that, I just want to run a hypothesis by you guys, which is that we talk a lot about like kids preferring Western literature, Western children's literature, right, to Indian literature, whether it's Enid Blyton or any of the others. And I want to ask you if there is a problem that in India we look at children's literature as a mode of learning more than a means of entertainment, which is to say that we don't have Neil Gaimans or Terry Pratchett's or Richmal Crompton's, right? Instead, we get like a very moralistic or a preachy sort of vein in literature. And then a follow-up to that is that, like in the course of this book, did you also research the comics that we have, right? For example, Raj comics or Diamond comics, which are probably the most widely read stuff by kids in India and was for a long time. So yeah, how does that figure into the whole children's literature game?
So that's graphic literature is another chapter that needs to be included in the book. So yes, I had made a list and this would be added to that. About Western literature and Indian literature, at one time there were not so many Indian books and people generally fell back on, epics and things like that. And therefore, those who could read in English were reading Western books, but in the Indian languages, children were reading whatever was available, whether it's most of the time as in magazines. However, I feel, one, children respond to the story, whatever the story is, wherever it comes from. And I do believe, and I do strongly believe, that in India, we have a pretty, what shall I say, we are very open to ideas and influences from anywhere. So we are willing to accept, even when we don't understand everything exactly, we're willing to take the storyteller on their own terms and understand the story. Now, having said that, now there is so much wonderful writing coming up here in India. I mean, just yesterday we had Andalib Wajid winning the NLF prize. You should read her, read her books. Shabnam Minwala, Ranjit Lal. There's innumerable number of Suniti Namjoshi. There's a long, long list of wonderful, wonderful Indian writers today who compete with the best. Why should we compete, actually? Who write as well as anybody, any good writer anywhere in the world. So I think that is changing, you know.
Hi, as a budding publisher with 7 titles, I find this book is very helpful because all the chapters included references through which I can access all the, I mean, we create the highly reasonable stories. So I do find this is really helpful. Only thing I felt missing is the book marketing, which I am struggling now. Maybe it will come in the next sequence, I guess so.
Another chapter.
True? Okay.
We have many chapter suggestions.
No,
many
because there are
volumes.
so many aspects that, I mean, we just could not include in this. It's not possible. I mean, it's an industry in itself. So when you think of it like that, there are so many aspects to it, you know. And this is not a one-way street. I mean, there's so much interaction happening at every level. So it is a unique industry, and it is a very, very special industry, and it is an industry that needs to be recognized and given the importance it deserves.
You know, as someone who's in the business of, putting together pitches practically every day, looking at hooks, marketability, I have an interesting question for both of you. How has the mainstream media responded to, writing about, featuring a book, which is also a book on children's books and publishing? I mean, yeah, so have you got requests for interviews? I mean, how are you going about promoting the book? I know it's available on Amazon, but are the Crossfords and the W.H. Smiths of the world willing to, stock the book?
We are hoping you'll take us on and mark.
No, but the book is already out. I'm an agent. Yeah.
Marketing, I mean, I don't know. Shailaja, we can ask Parul to answer that question. But just before that, you were asking about what kind of space it's got in the media in terms of reviews. Well, so far, I have not come across anything except that Radhika sent a copy of the book to Yogendra Yadav, and he is interested in children's books, and he was moved to write about children's books, and it was mentioned. He mentioned this book in his article, so which was then translated into Hindi and into Telugu, as far as I know, and I don't know, and published in newspapers. I don't know where else it's been published, though.
No, we haven't received any interview requests and so on.
Well, that tells you a lot about the media's response to children's literature and children's books.
One last
right?
question.
Yeah. Wonderful session and very important book, particularly, again, like somebody who is trying to put a foot into this whole children's literature. I primarily write in Hindi and getting published with Diktara and all. So my question is related to that. Have you covered the history of Indian children literature in other languages as well? That's one question. And second question, part of that follow-up is, Kanishk, to you. When you work with, various publishing houses, do you go only with English or primarily you look at the other languages also?
So I think you may have joined the session a little late.
Bit late, yeah, sorry for that.
So we started by saying we wanted very much to include writing from other regional languages. In fact, you mentioned Ektara. We went after especially looking at Ektara and its influence on contemporary Hindi literature. But somehow we didn't receive the chapter on time to be published. So we are very, very interested in looking at movements, especially in contemporary Hindi, which is quite exciting according to us and deserves to be looked at. So no, we do not have chapters. We expected 2 chapters on Hindi children's publishing. Neither of them came through. Yeah. So we are very happy you're working in that space, and we really hope that we will create more multilingual forums where people writing in different languages can really come and talk about the work that they are doing, share that knowledge, so that this is not, this English-speaking world of India does not sort of exclude other people working in other languages. And I hope we can have more conversations around that. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
To answer your second question, because of my severe linguistic limitations, I can only sell rights from English to Indian languages, and unfortunately, Indian languages, the publishers in Indian languages, they wait for a book to become a really, really big bestseller to be convinced about translating it into their local language and promoting it, because the margins in Indian language publishing are very slim, the price points are slim, advances are, and the print runs are also very low. So I have not really sold anything from, like any children's books from English into an Indian language, and I've already told you why I don't sell directly into those languages. So they are very price sensitive, those markets. They're almost like European markets, foreign markets. They are waiting for something big to come out of the UK, US, like become a million copies selling author or book, and then they translate into languages. So they are very savvy about what they want to publish and what they want to avoid. So I think with this we can the session has come to a close, and thank you Sandhya and thank you Shailaja for your insightful answers. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And do take a look at the book.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that, we are very aware that this book is just a conversation starter. So we hope that we would be satisfied if it starts a conversation. We are fine with critiques. We are not defensive in the least bit, as long as it does the work of starting this conversation and moving it forward. That's all.
Copies are available in the bookstore. It's available on Amazon. It's not available as an ebook. So hopefully soon. Thank you so much.